Hi, my name is Odi, and today I'm going to be teaching LINQ and how to use LINQ in C Sharp. So let's get started. First and foremost, we need Visual Studio. Let me launch that. Okay. So once Visual Studio is up and running, the next thing we need to do is just create a simple project. So I'll go to File, New Project. Pick C Sharp. Let's pick a simple console application. So let's call this LINQ tutorial. Okay, create a directory for solution. Sure. Okay, so we have a simple application, nothing fancy. You just have your program.cs and your main file, and anything you put here is what gets executed. So let me just write hello world just to show it's working. We run this and we should just see a flash of hello world. Or better yet, I could have used Ctrl F5 to just show hello world and press any key to continue. When you press, it goes away. Alright, now that I've done this, I need to teach you how to use LINQ. We have to go from step to step. So the first step I need to do now is to explain object and collection initializers, which is quite simple. Let's say I wanted a list of items. I could easily come here and say let me create a string array, and I could specify that this string array has, I don't know, 7 elements in it or 5 elements in it. Okay, then I can now say list sub a particular element 0. I can say hello. Let's do 1 equal to world. Okay, so I could now easily come here and use for each and say for each item in list, let's console dot write line, let's say hello world. Okay, I'm sorry, console dot write line item. Okay, now let's run this and see what we get. As you can see, hello world, and there are spaces. Okay, that's because we said that our array has a length of 5 and all that. An easier way of doing this okay, I could fix this by coming here and changing this to 2, so that's okay, the size is 2 and it's just 0 and 1 that are inside, and by the time I run this, as you can see, it's now showing up correctly. The problem is that having to memorize these ones is a bit of a pain. So especially if I were to add another one and I was to forget, if I added another item to the list, right, I could forget, and by the time I run it, it will fail. So you see, it's failing. Alright, the reason it's failing is that the size of the array is 2 and yet I've put 3 items into it. So to fix that, they introduced in C# 3.5 collection initializers was introduced. So with collection initializers, you could move this code, move it inside here, remove this indexing we did here, replace it with commas, finally, let me control KD. And finally, you don't ever have to worry about the size of the array anymore. Okay, sorry, let me control F5. As you can see, it's working correctly. Now, the next thing is, this is for collections. You also have initializers for objects. So let's say I created a class here. So let me just create a temporary class or an inner class. You can do that in .NET. Let me go ahead with the inner class. Let's call this person. Okay. Notice how the namespace of this class is now program.person. So it's really just semantics, but you can have classes inside of classes. I could have put it outside here. Okay, and if I do it that way, you can see it just linked tutorial.person. However, you can also make it an internal class. There's nothing wrong with that, just so that you can get used to it. Let's move on. Okay, now what I could do is, let's assume person has some properties like first name and last name. Okay, you could come here and declare the constructor of the person, so the person equal to new person, and then say person dot first name equal to od, person dot last name equal to Bebu. Something like this, right? But this is one way of doing it. However, there's also a simpler object initializer syntax. So if you have Visual Studio 2017, if you put your mouse on the new and you click this drop down, you can see object initializer can be simplified, and they opt to do it for you, which is essentially what you're looking at. So you can create the instance of the class and just specify the values of the properties. This also works even if the class has doesn't have a default constructor. So if I have first name, comma, last name, right? I could say this dot first name. I don't even need this dot. I could just say first name and last name equal to last name. Okay, same thing, no difference. Okay, as you can see now, it's unhappy here, but I could, in theory, come here and just put default, comma, last name, something like that, and it will first call the constructor. Oh, don't need the semicolon here. It will first call this constructor, and it will now manually set the properties. This would be equivalent to doing something like this. It would be the equivalent of saying person dot first name equal to od and person dot last name equal to Bebu. Okay, Bebu, that's proper pronunciation. So it's the same thing. So in fact, as you can see, yet again, it's also giving me a hint to change this to the object initializer syntax. All right, so now that I've gotten over the hump of explaining collection and initializer syntax, let's move on to something more interesting. Let me leave this class. I may need it in future, and let me remove this default constructor. Okay, so one thing you should note is that this collection initializer syntax works for anything that implements iCollection. So it can work for strings, it can work for list of strings, it can work for dictionary. No, dictionary is different. Okay, let's do that. So with dictionary, let's assume I was supposed to create a dictionary. Now the question is, what's a dictionary? A dictionary is just I know I've explained this before, but you know what, let's not go into that tangent. Let's continue what we're doing. Okay, so let's make this list of string. All right, Now, what you're looking at here is, okay, right? You can just use it to do simple iteration over a list and so on and so forth. The next thing I need to teach is extension methods. Okay, so I'm just teaching all the building blocks for understanding, LINQ. Extension method. What is extension method? What is an extension method? An extension method is a way of augmenting a type, okay, augmenting a class with new methods, especially if it's a class you don't own or you are not in control over. For example, let's say someone else was the one that wrote this person class. Let me bring it out into its own. Let's see. Let me extract it into its own file. Should be a move person to person.cs that extracts it into its own class. I can come here, make this public, and let's imagine that this class was sealed for some reason, and all of a sudden I don't want to just print a list of string. I want to print a list of person. Okay, that would mean having to come here and say new person and using the object initializer syntax. I could say first name equal to od, last name equal to Bebu, right? I could create another one. Remember to add a comma. I could create another person, and this time I would use first name AB, last name Igweze, right? So let me add one more person. First name Victor, last name Okosodo. Okay, all right. So I have 3 people essentially. So instead of calling it list, let's change this to people, and let's change item to what person. Now let's see what happens when we run this. If I do Ctrl F5, as you can see, it doesn't know how to serialize this person object, so it's just saying link tutorial.person, which is not what we want. Let's say we wanted to have a custom method here that says something like get full name or whatever, right? So that it would automatically just create person. Don't forget, as we want to add a get full name method to this person object, but if you pay attention, you notice that we don't own person, so we can't modify it. This is hypothetically. How are we going to solve this problem? Well, first of all, we need to look at the error that it's telling us. It's telling us person does not contain a definition get full name and no extension method get full name accepting first argument of type person. Okay, so let's go over it again. It doesn't have a definition, so there's no method that's called get full name person. But more importantly, there is no extension method that has get full name that accepts a first argument of type person. How do we fix this? Let's look at what that is saying. So to create an extension class, right, let's create a simple one here. Let's just add a simple file here. Let's just call this file extensions. Okay, extensions.cs. Now this extensions class, let's make it public. We have to make it static for reasons that will be clear in a moment. We can now have get full name as a method. It's supposed to return a string, which is the full name of the person. However, we can now come here and add our person property. So we say person, and that is it. So all it's going to do is just say return person dot first name plus, or let me just use string interpolation here. So say person first name person last name. Okay, all right. So this is not an extension method yet, but I just want to use it to show you an example. This is a static class that has a method called get full name that takes a person and returns a string. So I could go back to my program and rewrite just this line. Okay, to do something like this. So instead of saying person dot, I'll say extensions, extensions dot get full name, and I pass the person inside. This works, okay? So if I run it, Control F5, it runs, right? But the only problem there is that, as you can see, I had to know this extensions class and call it explicitly and call this get full name. So because of that, the C# compiler, right, they made some changes to it to allow you to just come here and add a this property in front of it. When you add this keyword in front of the first parameter, that turns this method into an extension method. It tells the C# compiler that anywhere you see person dot get full name, you should rewrite it like this. You should rewrite it to something like this. So let's do that. Let's say person dot, as you can see, get full name. But more importantly, look at it very well. You can see that it has an arrow pointing downwards, okay? And the reason it's pointing down is because it's an extension method, and it's even written here as well. So if I just call this, you can have it like this, and by the time I run the app, you can see it's working exactly the same way. Mind you, what happens behind the scenes is that the compiler will rewrite this to the original form, and the original form is extensions dot get full name, and we pass person inside. Okay, so let's save that. Let's Control F5. As you can see, it's exactly the same thing. Let me Control Z, back to get full name. So I've been able to show extension methods. Okay, now the next piece of thing I need to teach now is I need to teach what do they call it? I need to teach delegates, lambdas, and so on and so forth. But before I do that, I think this would be a good time to end the video here and take a break. So thank you very much. See you next time.